Subject of this video is background checks, specifically regulated versus non-regulated background checks. By regulated, I'm referring to background checks that are governed by the FCRA, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, as well as applicable state laws and local ordinances. By non-regulated, I mean background checks that fall outside of the FCRA and therefore are not subject to its strict requirements and procedures. I'll be discussing how regulated and non-regulated background checks are different, some of the advantages and disadvantages of each, as well as what I think are some of the myths and misconceptions about non-FCRA background checks. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Jeff Briggs. I'm founder and general counsel at Glad I Know, which is a leading platform for non-FCRA background checks. Previously, I was the founder and general counsel at Screening One, which remains a leading platform for regulated background checks, primarily to employers and property managers conducting employment and tenant background screening. I note my background and experience because it gives me what I think is a unique perspective to understand the framework for both regulated and non-regulated background checks and the important differences between the two. Before I begin, let me introduce a few important items. First, this is an overview and summary only. This is not legal advice. Before you even consider using non-FCRA background checks for any reason, it's very important that you carefully review your particular use case, meaning the purpose for which you intend to use the data. Make sure that your specific use is permitted under the platform's terms of service and the applicable law. Every reputable non-FCRA platform, including Glad I Know, will clearly and specifically set forth the permitted and non-permitted uses of their data, the do's and don'ts. If they don't, or if they make the permitted and non-permitted uses hard to find or hard to understand, or if they advertise a use which is inconsistent with their terms of service, trust me, stay away. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, is very active in enforcement in this area, and believe me, you do not want to be subject of an enforcement action. If you have any questions about your particular use of background checks, you should consult with an attorney knowledgeable in this area, as well as review the permitted and non-permitted uses on the platform. If you have any questions specifically about use of Glad I Know data, I would be happy to talk with you directly. Please email me and I'll get back to you right away. Okay, so what are the primary differences between regulated and non-regulated background checks? What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of each? And what are some of the myths and misconceptions about non-FCRA background checks? The first difference is confidentiality. Unlike regulated background checks, non-regulated background checks are completely 100% confidential. What does this mean? No disclosures, no consents, no authorizations. As we say at Glad I Know, the only person that knows about the background check and the results is you. Now, let's compare this confidentiality to a regulated background check, which is very different. An FCRA background check requires a very specific and tightly regulated list of disclosures to the consumer, the subject of the search, as well as a very specific consent and authorization by the consumer before the background check can be run. And by the way, in the context of an FCRA background check, the background report itself is referred to as either a consumer report or an investigative consumer report. Another big difference between a regulated and a non-regulated background check is the adverse action requirement. In the context of an FCRA background check for employment purposes, in the event the check reveals information which the employer decides may justify adverse action, which in this case would include a decision not to offer employment or to withdraw a conditional offer of employment, then the employer must follow a very specific notification process. This includes providing to the consumer, the subject of the search, a pre-adverse notification, which must include a copy of the consumer report and a summary of the rights of the consumer. Next, once the pre-adverse notice is provided, a reasonable time must be allowed for the consumer to challenge the information in the consumer report before any adverse action can be taken. This typically is considered to be at least 5 business days. At this point, if the consumer does in fact dispute the information in the consumer report, the intended adverse action must come to a stop until the credit reporting agency, also referred to as the CRA, has resolved the dispute. Now, when it comes to regulated searches, it's important to understand that the FCRA is not the end of the story. The party doing the FCRA background check must also comply with all of the applicable state laws and local ordinances. For example, a number of jurisdictions have enacted what have been labeled as fair chance laws, which, in general, prohibit an employer from even asking about a prior arrest or a conviction on a job application. This is commonly referred to as banning the box, referring to the box that an applicant checks if they have had a history of an arrest or a conviction. In addition, some jurisdictions prohibit a background check altogether until after a conditional offer of employment has been made. Further, a number of states restrict the time that a conviction can be reported in a regulated background check. For example, in my home state, California, as well as a number of other states, including New York and Washington state, a credit reporting agency cannot even report a criminal conviction if the disposition, release, or parole date is beyond 7 years. Some states limit this restriction on the salary of the position. Now, let's talk about the practical application of those types of laws for a minute. Let's say an employer is considering two equally qualified candidates. Candidate 1 has never engaged in any criminal conduct whatsoever. In contrast, Candidate 2 was arrested, tried, and convicted of a serious felony, even perhaps a violent felony, but the date of disposition of that conviction was 7 years plus 1 day ago. What's the result? In states with a 7-year restriction, the criminal history report, which the employer will receive from the consumer reporting agency, will be identical, a completely clean record with no reportable offenses for both candidates. Now, you may be thinking, how can this be? How can an employer who is responsible for taking reasonable steps to ensure a safe workplace for all of its employees be restricted by law from knowing about the criminal conviction history of a job applicant? Personally, I think these laws are misguided. I think they are based on a notion that is wrong, that a hiring manager is incapable of exercising his or her reason, good judgment, and common sense when it comes to considering and weighing the circumstances of a prior criminal conviction of the job applicant. Okay, with respect to regulated background checks, I've covered a lot of ground quickly, and again, this is a summary and outline only, and in no way is a complete step-by-step on the requirements of a regulated background check. Given the complexity of the law in this area, it is my strongest recommendation to only conduct FCRA background checks through a top, reputable credit reporting agency. Do not try this on your own. All top CRAs have knowledgeable attorneys and well-developed systems in place to make sure that you are fully compliant with the very technical and complex laws in this area. By design, Glad I Know is not affiliated with any CRAs, but I would be happy to make a few recommendations if you would like. Again, feel free to contact me directly. Now, returning to the differences between regulated and non-regulated background checks. Another important difference between the two is the timing of the results. Results from an FCRA background check can range from a few days to well over 1 week, and in some cases, even much longer. In comparison, most background checks, most background check results on a non-FCRA platform are much faster, and at Glad I Know, the results are returned to you instantly. Another difference is cost. Depending on the product selected, an FCRA background check can cost $60 to $100 each, and in some cases, even more. In contrast, most non FCRA platforms offer comprehensive background checks for generally less than $20. And at Glad I Know, we have packages that can reduce that cost to as low as $5 per comprehensive background report. Finally, let's talk about the quality of the data. What I consider to be one of the biggest myths and misconceptions about non FCRA background checks is that the data is not the highest quality. Based on my 20 plus years in the industry, I can tell you firsthand that the quality of non FCRA data used to be a bit inconsistent and incomplete. But in the last several years, there has been what I think is a complete transformation in this quality. The top companies that aggregate the public record data have made big investments and have done, in my view, a great job of compiling and digitizing the public records and making them available to you instantly. At Glad I Know, we only partner with the very best data aggregators, the gold standards in the industry. The result is over 1 billion of the highest quality publicly available records at your fingertips, delivered confidentially and instantly for as low as $5 per comprehensive report. At Glad I Know, the categories of records searched includes felony and misdemeanor criminal records, traffic and infractions, sex offender, bankruptcies, liens, judgments, employment and education history, skills, licenses, permits, social media, photos, vehicles, planes and watercraft, weapons permits, current and former addresses, phones and emails, neighbors, family members, associates, and the list goes on. One great way to see the product is to go to gladiknow.com and click on Sample Report. One more word of caution. If your use case allows a non regulated background check and you are selecting a non FCRA platform, be very careful of low cost, low quality products that are presented as a comprehensive report. Unfortunately, many people have been misled into buying a low cost product only to find out it includes contact information only and provides no meaningful public record data, including criminal history. In my view, these products are just low cost leaders and have very limited real value. That's why at Glad I Know, we only sell one product and one product only, a comprehensive background report. In conclusion, if you are considering non FCRA background checks, carefully review your particular use case against the permitted and non permitted uses on the platform. Many of our clients at Glad I Know are very pleased to find the wide range of permitted uses. And remember, your search and the results at Glad I Know are always 100% confidential. If your use case is permitted, a non FCRA platform could be a tremendous benefit to you in time, cost, and the scope of information returned. And again, if you have any questions about your particular use case or our products at Glad I Know, please email me and I would be happy to speak with you directly. Thank you.